Humans are walking war crimes, and that's why they're not allowed in our wars, declared Professor Luthor, as his words hung over his class of alien students in silent shock. The lecture hall, formed out of sleek metallic walls bathed in sterile light from across the interstellar expanse, seemed to reverberate with the weight of his words. Yes, the professor continued, his voice a mixture of disgust and admiration. You may have heard the rumors, wild tales of human savagery on the battlefield, but I assure you, the reality is far more disturbing. The room was filled with all forms of aliens from all walks of the Galactic Coalition. There was the seven-limbed Krika, whose large, multifaceted eyes were blinking rapidly in what could only be translated into nervousness. The hulking Vosk, with thick armored hide, leaned forward in his seat, frowning with his ridged brow creased. Even the usually serene and emotionless Zelak, with their translucent jelly-like forms, seemed to ripple with unease. One student, a young Vkan with pale blue skin and 4 dexterous arms, raised a hand tentatively. But Professor Luthor, aren't humans physically weaker than many of the species in the Coalition? How could they possibly be considered so dangerous? Luthor's eyes shifted to the student. His large, dark eyes narrowed. You see, it is not their physical strength that makes them dangerous. It is something far more insidious, something unexpected. The professor's hand pressed a number of unseen buttons, and a holographic display behind him flickered to life. The first image to appear was that of a human soldier in primitive body armor, standing atop a pile of rubble. His face was smeared with dirt and blood, and his eyes burnt with an intensity that seemed to transcend the image itself. This is a human during the Siege of Talva, one of the last conflicts they were involved in before the ban, Luthor explained. Note the absence of advanced armaments, minimum armor, and yet this one man killed more than 3,000 Scorn warriors in one night. There was a collective intake of breath from the corporation students in the classroom. The Scorn were amazingly resilient and dangerous foes on the battlefield, their warriors all but 9 feet tall, their claws tearing through steel. The thought one human so badly armed in comparison could do such damage was unthinkable. A reptilian student, Rakesh, sprang to his feet. His green and gold scales were shining with indignation. This cannot be. What sort of weapon did he use? Luthor's face clouded. No weapon, just his mind. Humans have an unparalleled capacity for violence and a disturbingly creative approach to warfare. They don't just fight, they adapt, they improvise. They find ways to turn even most benign objects into instruments of death. He gestured to the one after that, and the siege aftermath fell into view. The battlefield was littered with the bodies of Scorn warriors, their massive forms lying in pools of dark, viscous blood. Among the dead lay crude, makeshift traps, sharp shards of metal tied to ropes, homemade explosives rigged from scrounge materials, and pits filled with sharpened stakes. It wasn't just his prowess in combat that made the Scorn fall, Luthor continued. It was his ability to think different, to see a solution where others saw only obstacles. And it's just this ability that makes humans so volatile, so dangerous. The class was still, as if the weight of the professor's words had settled over them like some heavy shroud. As a matter of fact, all had heard stories of human guile, but this was another thing entirely. An almost animalistic instinct for survival at any cost, an idea that simply didn't fit into any traditional understanding of warfare. One of the students, a wiry Aaron with bioluminescent markings that pulsed softly in the dim light, leaned forward. His tone was tinged with both curiosity and concern. But if they're so dangerous, why not just eliminate them entirely? Surely the Coalition could. Luthor raised a hand, silencing him. Eliminate them? Easier said than done. The Coalition once considered it, but came to realize quite quickly that humans, put in a position where their very extinction was at risk, became even more formidable. They fight like cornered beasts with a tenacity that borders on madness. The further you push them, the deadlier they become. He paused then, letting him digest the weight of his words. No, the only way to handle them was to stop them from taking part in any further wars. It was the only way the universe could be safe from their destructive potential. Again, the Aaron student raised his hand, his 4 fingers shaking like leaves as he did so. "But Professor, isn't this a little unfair to that one species? Aren't we denying them their right to self-defense?" Luthor snorted, his eyes softening slightly. "It is unfair, perhaps, but consider the alternative. Giving humans license to wage galactic war would be like turning loose a force of nature, and one that even the most refined species in the coalition cannot really understand or contain. It is not a question of justice, but survival." The room settled into a reflective silence, with the students grappling with unsettling truths they'd just learned. All of their lives, they had been led to believe that the ban placed by the coalition upon human involvement in war was one of even-handedness, a means through which a technologically deficient species would not be overwhelmed. But now, they knew it was something much more involved, much more terrifying. Luthor toggled off the holographic display and turned back to his class. "Remember this lesson well. The galaxy is full of mysteries, and not all of them are meant to be understood. Some are simply meant to be avoided." The professor looked at his watch and nodded slightly. "That's all for now. I suggest you ponder on this thought. There will be a sequel to this tomorrow, in which we go deeper into the events that led to the ban." As the students began gathering up their things and started filing out of the lecture hall, Luthor watched them with a reflective expression. He had witnessed the atrocities of human warfare firsthand. He had lost friends and colleagues to the unstoppable, merciless ingenuity of the human mind. Few knew better than he that the ban was not a precaution, it was a necessity. Yet, as he watched the last of the students file out, there was the constant nagging at his mind that he'd never get away from. The galaxy was huge and caught many breaks. Regardless of all the precautions the coalition had taken, he couldn't get rid of the nagging feeling that the humans were just biding their time, waiting for the time when they would be set free again. And when it came, he was afraid no amount of preparation would ever work. The human unit moved with a certain precision through the dense jungle terrain, talking of years of training and discipline, weapons at the ready. "This was supposed to be a suicide mission," Luthor explained. "The coalition had to stall the Scorn until our main forces could regroup, and this human unit had been given the job of holding them off. Outnumbered, outgunned, and completely surrounded, they were." He paused for a moment and let the gravity of what was about to be said hang in the air. "And instead of trying to retreat or surrender, the humans did something completely unexpected. They counterattacked." The display flickered once more, this time showing the humans in combat. They moved wraith-like through the underbrush, guns spitting fire as they fought the Scorn with a savagery bordering on madness. Few in number though they were, the humans fought with a ferocity and guile that sent the Scorn reeling. Initially, the Scorn commanders were puzzled, Luthor said, continuing. They couldn't fathom how this puny force was holding its own, let alone actually pushing them back. But then they realized something far more disconcerting. The humans were not only fighting for survival, but relishing it. Disbelieving murmurs reverberated around the classroom. Most of the students were from species that had long since suppressed such base instincts and found the idea that anyone could derive enjoyment from such carnage simply incomprehensible. Luthor gestured to the display, which now showed a human soldier standing over the body of a fallen Scorn warrior. His chest heaved with the exertion, but his eyes held that wild, almost euphoric tinge, an indication of something deep and even primeval in him stirring. The humans called it the thrill of the hunt, Luthor said, his tone tinged with something that might have been fear. They would lure the Scorn into traps, picking them off one by one, always staying just out of reach. They turned the jungle into their own personal killing ground, and for 3 days and nights, they waged a guerrilla war unlike anything the Scorn had ever seen. He paused, his eyes scanning the room. And on the 4th day, the humans disappeared. The holographic display flickered, its image shifting to show the aftermath of the battle. The jungle was littered with bodies of Scorn warriors, all muscular masses made futile by the hit-and-run guerrilla tactics of the humans. But of the humans themselves, there was nothing. They seemed to have vanished into the shadows, leaving only ruin in their wake. The Scorn felt that they were being driven insane, Luthor added, that humans had no longer a hint of rational thinking in them and were little more than beasts running through the jungle, searching for their next victim. They were so terrified that they completely abandoned the colony, retreating to their ships and leaving Cadria to the humans. He turned and faced the class, his expression heavy. And that is how a single human unit, without any support and without reinforcements, managed to liberate an entire planet from one of the most feared species in the galaxy. The room fell dead silent. What the students had come prepared for was an example of human savagery. What they now faced, as if it might be far worse, was an understanding that humans were not dangerous merely because they could kill, but because they enjoyed doing so. They had managed to make war almost a game, where life and death were the stakes, and they always seemed to have the upper hand. A quivering young Zelak lifted a tendril. "Professor, if the humans are so good at war, why don't they declare war on us? What stops them from taking over the galaxy?" Luthor's face relaxed a fraction, and he exhaled very slowly. "That, my dear students, is the question that haunts every member of the Coalition. We do not know why they have not turned their gaze upon us. Perhaps they are content to live peacefully. Maybe they are simply waiting for the perfect moment in time, or maybe they have simply not found a worthy opponent yet." He let those words hang in the air, a chill reminder of the uncertainty surrounding the humans. Class had come for answers, and all they seemed to have found were questions nobody in the galaxy seemed able to answer. And as they sat there, reflecting on what they had now come to understand, one thing became increasingly clear. A ban on human involvement in galactic war was more than a precaution. It was a desperate attempt to contain a force that could very well alter the fate of the entire galaxy if unleashed. Luthor finally nodded, the signal that this lecture was at an end. "That will be all for today. I suggest you take some time to reflect on what we have discussed. Tomorrow, we shall review the Coalition's decision to ban human involvement in war and the consequences it has had on our collective security." The weightiness of the morning lessons hung in the air as the students filed out of the room while Luthor watched them go, suddenly uncomfortable. The humans had been a mystery for so long, a riddle no one had ever quite figured out. And now, poring over their history in more depth, he had the ineludible impression that they faced an event, a disaster looming to overwhelm the very core of space. The lecture hall was fuller than it had ever been, word having circulated not only around the campus, but beyond that Professor Luthor was uncovering secrets long entombed truth, draped in mystery and fear. Today was the day he would address the most tantalizing question of them all, the true reason humans were banned from galactic warfare. The air was electric with anticipation as the professor entered. Somber-faced, his usual confidence only slightly tempered by the weight of what he had to say, he moved to the center of the room. "Today, we will face the most momentous decision ever to come before the Galactic Coalition," Luthor began, his voice rumbling throughout the silenced chamber. "You have studied the atrocities that humans can inflict upon others, their unnerving delight in combat, and their uncanny ability to transform any landscape into a place of their own. None of that compares with what I'm about to let you in on." The room dimmed as a holographic display flickered on, and a complex series of documents and images swept across it. These are classified Coalition files, declassified only after heated debate and violent opposition. They are the records of the final incident leading to the ban, a confrontation that almost finished the Galactic Coalition in one swoop.